Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to be making Connect 4. This is the finished game. It works like how you'd expect. You just have to connect 4 in any way possible, and then the winner will get a point. In this case it was red, so red has 1, and then you get the game over screen and you get to play again. And the points stay, it remembers what your last point was and everything. Hopping right into it, you can see we've got 3 files, an index.html, script.js, and style CSS. I'm going to run through this index.html file really quick, so if you need to, just pause it. I want to go quick so that we can get right into the cool JavaScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set up my boilerplate, give it a title. Our first divider is going to be the game container, and then that's going to have a play button that just says play game. We'll also need a way to keep track of the score, so I'm going to create a scoreboard. This is going to be the last thing we actually implement in JavaScript, but we can set it up in the HTML now so we don't have to come back to this file. We have 2 colors, red and yellow. We also need to link our JavaScript and our CSS file. So let's do that. And that should be all the HTML that we need. Hopping into the style CSS folder, we can start styling our game container. I'm going to give it a width of 420 pixels, and I'm going to give it a height of the same thing. Make it display flex with a flex direction of row, and give it a flex wrap of no wrap. I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to give it a slight border. I'm also going to give it a box shadow. We're not really trying to make this too pretty, but it doesn't hurt to make it look a little nice. And there we go. That's our game container. JavaScript time. Let's make a function called newGame to start us off. This is going to take in a button for the parameter. The first thing we're going to do is set the button style display equal to none. This is going to be the play game button. We don't want to show that while we're actually playing. Then we're going to define the game, which is just going to be getting the ID game container. Next, I'm going to make some comments. We're going to need columns. We're going to need an array that stores the columns and the rows. So let's just define a variable here. It'll be an empty array. And we'll do the same for the other one. I'm going to call this slots array because I feel like they're technically slots, right? That you put the little connect 4 things in. Next, we're going to need to determine what the next color is going to be. So let's make a variable called next color. And I'm going to start my first color as red. It doesn't really matter what you started as, though. It could be yellow, or you can make this game with different colors if you want to, actually. Now we can actually create the columns. I'm going to dynamically create these just using a for loop. Now we're going to want to say if I is less than 7 here because we want 7 columns, and then we're going to have 6 slots per column later on. So let's create a new element, which we can call column. And then we can give the column the class name of column. And then we can append it to the game and push it to our array. Now we're going to create a class called slot. This is going to have a constructor, which is going to take in an HTML element, a column index, a row index, and we can set this column equal to the column, this element equal to the element, and this row equal to the row. Lastly, we're going to set this state, and we're just going to make that equal a blank string. The state will eventually be used to determine if it's a red or yellow. And we're going to give it a clicked method. Now we can create the slots and we can push them to the columns array. So let's loop through all the columns as a single column. Let's create our slot column array, and then we can say another for loop. Again, this time we're going to be looping for 6, not 7, because each column is going to have 6 slots. We can define a div, which is going to be a new element. This element will eventually be our actual slot element. We can give it the class name of slot. We can append it to the column and push it to the array. Then we can create an onClick function. This function is just going to call the clicked method of slot. Now we can push the slot column to the slots array. And let's console log the slots array. Let's call the new game function and pass in the parameter of button, which is going to be get document, get the element by the ID play button. We should now be able to see in the console, oh, we have an error. Div is not defined. Oh, I made a mistake earlier. On line 14 and 13, div is supposed to be column and dispatch event is also. So I just want to take a minute and explain what we just did now that we're console logging this. So we have these 7 indexes, right? These are essentially the columns. Inside of each of these columns, we have the 6 slots, which can be thought of as rows. Each row contains a column index for its parent container, a row index, which is the row it's in, its own element, and a state, which they're all currently empty, but eventually we'll be switching these to, red and yellow, which are the 2 colors that your Connect 4 slots could be filled with. If we go into this index of 1 for the column, and we check this out, it'll have a column index of 1. If we go to the 5th one in the row, it'll have a column index of 1 and a row index of 5. So hopefully this makes sense, because this is the key to us building this whole game. We're going to be using this for the rest of it. And this is how we're going to determine who wins and what state each thing has. This is how we're going to keep track of everything. Alright, now we can hop back into the style sheet and we can style our columns and our slots. Let's start with the column. Let's give it the same border that we gave our game container. A width of 59 pixels. A background color of blue. We can display flex and give it a flex direction of column. Let's justify the content space between and align the item center. With a z-index of 1, and lastly let's make the position relative. Moving on to our slots, we'll give this a background color of white with a width of 100%. Position here can be absolute. With a z-index of 2. And a height of 48 pixels. And a border radius of 50% for that square look. Save it, and nice. It's looking good. I know it looks a little funny. We're going to fix this in the JavaScript. Where we create this, we're actually going to use the eye to dynamically space them out because they're all on top of each other right now. So we can say div style top equals I times 70 plus 2 plus pixel. And that looks beautiful. That's exactly what we want. It looks pretty even. Like I said, this doesn't have to be perfect. We're more looking at the JavaScript functionality. So it's okay if it looks a little rough, but this actually looks really good. Now we can loop through the slots array, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the bottom ones to have a class of clickable so that they can be clicked, which we'll work on in a little bit. But for now, let's just say column 5, element class list, add clickable. Let's also pass the next color. We'll be using that later. In the style sheet again, let's say slot, clickable, hover. And give it a background color of gray. And you'll see now the bottom ones are in fact hoverable gray, and those are the only ones. Next, we can check to see if the game is draw, if it's a tie. So we'll make a function here, is draw, and we'll pass it the slots array. We can also check to see if there's a winner. Let's make a function here. We can call it isWinner, and this will also take in the slots array. It'll also probably take some other variables, but we'll get to that when we get there. We can check if the game is over. Let's make a game over function, which can take in the winner. And then we're going to have to set the scoreboard when it's over. So let's make a function for that, which will also take in the winner. Now we can work on our clicked functionality. Let's say in the method const l equals this element, just to set it up. And then we can say if it doesn't have the class clickable, let's return, right? Because we only want the clickable elements to be running this function. Let's set the background color of the element equal to the next color. And then let's set the state equal to the next color as well. Let's make the next element clickable. Here we can say if slots array, and then we can say this column, and then this row -1, right? Because we're starting at the 5 index, so -1 would be 4, next one up. And then 3, and then 2, and so on and so forth. And we're going to check to see if it exists for that exact reason, so that when we're at 0, we don't get an error. Now we can say slots array, this column, then this row -1 again, and we can give it well, we can give the element of it the class clickable. And then we can also give it the next color, which again, we're going to be using in a little bit. And there we go. Look at that. It's working. We can click the next one. They're still all red, but we're going to fix that in a minute. But that is working beautifully. Let's change the next color. We can say next color is equal to red. If that's true, let's just set it equal to yellow. And if it's not equal, that means it's equal to yellow. So we can just set it back to red. Look at that. It looks great. Of course, if I double click the same one, it'll still cause an issue, but we'll fix that later on. We'll come back here. We still have some more clickable functionality that we have to add. While we are here though, we can work on setting up the class. So what we want to do is be able to have a preview of the next color instead of it being gray. So let's say old color equals next color. And then we can get all of the elements with the class clickable and loop through them. And here we can say that we can remove the old class, or sorry, the old color, the class of old color, there we go, and we can add the new color. Now it's very important that you put that right below it. Now changing this to red hover, it'll be red, and then yellow hover will of course be yellow. And there we go, we have our hover and our click. This is working perfectly. Now what we can do is we can check for the game over. So let's say if is draw with the slots array being passed. If that equals true, let's call game over. And we'll pass it the next color. We can also check for a winner here. So if is winner. And here we're going to pass the column, the row, the next color, and the slots array. If that equals true, again, we'll call game over and pass the next color. Let's say here if winner equals undefined, return. And then we can start building out our isDraw function. Actually, we can build out the whole thing. First, let's set the score for winner in game over. Now let's say let isDraw equal true, and then slots array for each. We'll loop through all the columns. And then what we can do is we can loop through all of the slots. Now, basically it's a draw whenever every single slot has a state assigned to it, right? Because that means they were all clicked. So if any slot here equals a blank string, we can return false because we know it's not a draw. But if they all have it, we should be returning true because there's nowhere left to click. Let's console log game over in the menu, and then we can test it out. Hopefully we did this right, because I don't want to have to click all these little circles a bunch of times, or sorry, little slots. Probably should have just named them circle. Perfect, we got the game over message. That's exactly what we wanted to see. Now let's address the issue I talked about earlier, where if you click it, it's still clickable. Probably should have just done this right off the bat, but that's okay, we can do it now. So let's make this element not clickable. We can simply do this by removing the class of clickable. And now I'm double clicking on these and they're not changing, which is exactly what we want. Our program's working perfectly so far. Lastly, we should handle the game over by removing all the elements inside of the game. We can do that by grabbing each of the columns and setting the inner HTML equal to a blank string. And then we can also get rid of the column. This is going to make it so that we can replay the game really easily. It could cause issues if we left all the elements there. And then let's give the play button a display again. Once again, we're going to click all these just to make sure it's working. If you don't want to test it now, you could test it later once we do the isWinner function. But never hurts to test a little bit early and try to catch mistakes. So inside the isWinner function, we can define the winning lines. It's going to be an object full of 4 arrays. I think the best way to do this is for me to just write out the code silently and then explain it after. So feel free to just copy along with what I'm doing if you're writing the code. Sorry if this looks a little different, but I forgot to film the explanation while I was going along with the project. So the reason that we're saying something like this, right, column -1 row, column -2 row, column -3 row, is because we essentially want to check all the ones to the left, right? So we're going to start here, and we're going to go 1 to the left, 2 to the left, 3 to the left, so on and so forth. And we're going to be checking the state of all of them. So if I click another one and it's red, it'll recognize that that is, in fact, another red one. And then we're going to do the same thing on the right side. So this is called horizontal because it's going to be checking for winners on the left and right. And this is what you need is 4 winners in order to win. Or sorry, you need 4 of the same color in order to win. Hopefully that makes sense. Sorry if this looks a little different, but I forgot to film the explanation while I was going along with the project. So the reason that we're saying something like this, right, column minus 1 row, column minus 2 row, column minus 3 row, is because we essentially want to check all the ones to the left, right? So we're going to start here, and we're going to go 1 to the left, 2 to the left, 3 to the left, so on and so forth. And we're going to be checking the state of all of them. So if I click another one and it's red, it'll recognize that that is, in fact, another red one. And then we're going to do the same thing on the right side. So this is called horizontal because it's going to be checking for winners on the left and right. And this is what you need is 4 winners in order to win. Or sorry, you need 4 of the same color in order to win. Hopefully that makes sense. Now we can copy this and we can essentially make the same thing, but let's name it vertical, and this one will test the vertical lines. We're going to have to change it a little bit. Instead of minus and instead of plus, what we can do is say row minus 1, row minus 2, row minus 3, row minus 4, and then we can do the same thing, but we can make it row plus 1, row plus 2, row plus 3, row plus 4. What we can say here is if, and then we'll call it testing function. We'll pass the winning lanes horizontal, the color, and the slots array. If that equals true, let's call it test lines. If that equals true, then what we can do is return now we can define the function. Let's say test the lines to see if someone has won. Let's call the function test lines. It's going to take in the lines, the color, and the slots array. Let's say let connected slots equal 1. These are essentially going to be how many slots are touching. So it starts with 1 and you want to have 4 to win. We can determine this by looping through all the lines, so saying lines for each. And then what we can do is we can loop through the length of the line. Here we can define slot location, which is going to equal line I. Now we have to make sure that we don't allow for searching off the screen, all the way to the left or top or bottom, because we could technically do that based on our code right now. What we can do is we can say if, and then we can take the slots array, and then we can take the slot location. Slot location 0 is the column and 1 is the row. So we can actually just set them equal to that. Just to make it a little bit easier to understand. So here we can say if the column is greater than or equal to 0 and the column is less than or equal to 6, right? Because there's 6 indexes, because there's 7 columns. And then do the same thing with the row. but the row is going to be 5 because there's one less slot per column. Then we can make sure that it's defined. You can do this by saying if type of slots array, get the index of the column and then the index of the row, does not equal undefined. I have to add parentheses to this. So if that's not undefined, let's say if slots array, column, row, grab the state, if that equals the color, then we can console log connected slots. If not, we can break, and then we can add one to the connected slots, right? Because if one of them doesn't equal it, we just want to break and end the loop because we know that's not going to be a winning line, because if the one after that equals red and we were looking for red, that's going to cause a problem. Looks like column is not defined here, so we're going to have to fix that. Oh, apparently I just don't know how to code. I set it equal to column. I meant to set column equal to this, and then row equal to slots location 1. So I'm just going to fix that real quick. Sorry about that. And that's working exactly how we'd expect it to. It's now able to detect when the one next to it is of the same color. So we're going to be able to use this to determine if we're winning or not. Let's add an else break at the end of that initial if. Now at the very end we can say if connected slots is greater than or equal to 4, return true. And if it's not, of course, we're just going to return false. Perfect. We have our one game with game over. Now let's add the vertical line and then test it to make sure that works. That's working, great. Now let's add our diagonal lines. We can start with the diagonal line left. It's essentially going to be subtracting 1 from the column and then subtracting 1 from the row, which is basically just saying go left 1 and go down 1, or sorry, up 1. And then for the second part, we can add 1 for the column and add 1 for the row, which is going to be saying go right 1 and then down 1. Let's test it. Perfect, that's working exactly how we'd expect it to. Let's test the other part, which is just going down. Awesome, that's working too. Nice. Now we can copy this and make the diagonal right. This one's going to be slightly different. We're going to be subtracting 1 and adding 1 to the row. And then for the second part, we can subtract from the row. Now let's test this as well. First we've got to, of course, call the function. Let's see if this works. Perfect. That worked. Let's test it going the other way. And that worked too. Awesome, we're in good shape. We have all of the ways that you can win now fully working. Let's go into the set score and let's say document get element by ID winner plus score with a capital S, right? Because that's how we set up the IDs. And then what we can do is we can say inner HTML equals, copy everything, put that in a parse int, which right now is going to grab the 0, and then just say +1. This is how we're going to be able to add to our scoreboard. And that did not work. Let's see why it did not work. Because we put commas instead of periods. Sorry about that. I'll fix it real quick. It's going to be 1 there. We're going to have to get rid of the auto-generated parentheses. And there's going to be another one right here. Now we should be working. Awesome. We got +1 for red. That's exactly what we wanted to see. So our score calculation is working. Now we're going to delete the calling of the function and append this to the play button element. So we can say onClick equals new game, and we can pass this, which is going to be passing the button this way instead of by getting the document ID. And now the play game button will start it. So let's make it a little bit prettier. First, let's grab the play button by the ID. Let's give it a width of 100% and a height of 100%. Make it display flex. Justify the content center. And align the content center as well. Or sorry, align the items center. And let's also say when you hover the play button, background color gray. The whole thing should be gray because this is the parent element, not the actual text. And then let's get the scoreboard by the ID. Let's give it a position of absolute with a bottom of 0. Display flex on this. No wrap. Let's give it a direction of column. That looks pretty good, but I want to make it sideways or aligned horizontally. So let's say scores, display, flex, flex direction, row, justify the content, space between. And that looks pretty good. That should be it. Hopefully you enjoyed this and you learned something. If you did, let me know in the comments or leave a like. Hope you have a great day. Bye.